All right, we're going to embrace debate here on SNL. Landry Locker usually joined by Cody Stutes, but it is March Madness. So Cody Stutes is on his annual March Madness trip. I'm about to hit the road, going to San Antonio for the anniversary. Going to take the daughter to SeaWorld. So we got a lot going on, but the content does not stop. And I kind of wanted to embrace not only debate, but the early part of NFL free agency involving the Houston Texans, Nick Caserio, D'Amico Ryans, Nick Caley, all the moves that have been made. And I also want to embrace one of the best things that goes on this time of the year, one of the best events in American sports, March Madness. So we are going to go all out hackage today and would appreciate y'all participating in the chat. Subscribe, like, ride along. SNL, subscribe on all podcast platforms. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel. It's popping in just a few months' time. Myself and Cody Stutes, best collab in the game. And we're going to break down. We have an 8-move bracket involving Nick Caserio, D'Amico Ryans, and all the moves that they've made. And as you can see here, CJ Stroud, looking on. Don't know if he's concerned. Don't know if he's intrigued. I think he sure as hell would probably like the Texans to make a few more moves to help him out. The guy's blocking for him and the guy's catching passes from him. He probably wants a little more of that in the draft. But in free agency, the Texans, a lot of the focus has been defense. They've done a few things on offense. We're going to go through the 8 big moves 2 weeks into free agency, and we're going to discuss the best moves that have been made by the Texans. And we're going to have the 8 participants are going to be the Christian Kirk trade, which was technically, I guess you could say it's a signing. We'll get into that. We're going to talk about the wide receiver depth moves. This is almost like a 16-1. I think we know who's going to win that one. We're going to talk about the Cam Robinson signing, which happened this week. We're going to talk about the Sheldon Rankins signing. And then we're going to talk about the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade, the ridiculed guards that they've brought in, Ingram and Tomlinson, and then the Laramie Tunsil trade and the DL depth pieces, specifically the DNs that they've brought in, and all of the national media types, all the people who have local interest are basically really hoping for a showdown between Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, that move, and the Kirk move. And there's a lot of talking points there. Now, will it happen, though, or could there be some upsets? You never know what's going on inside mine and Cody's mind. We start with matchup number 1, Christian Kirk versus wide receiver depth. The Christian Kirk move, I think, is interesting because, first of all, when you came into this offseason, you had the least amount of depth in the wide receiver room in the entire league. Nico Collins was the only receiver that you could really count on that you had under contract. And then you had 2 more guys in Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie who really haven't produced when called upon the last 2 years. And you got to wonder what's up with those guys. I think at the very least, the wide receiver depth does take care of the back end of what I just mentioned when it comes to Mechie and Hutchinson. I think it's possible that these guys are an upgrade over those, and you do improve the wide receiver room at the very bottom. Now, the question is, how much did you improve it at the top? Now, Christian Kirk is better than nothing. And if you get the Christian Kirk from 3 years ago that warranted the deal that Jacksonville gave him, then you're in pretty good shape. But Jacksonville's moved on to bigger and better things. They got Brian Thomas Jr. They got the number 5 overall pick. And the Texans are bringing in a guy that has been unable to stay healthy. Pretty effective player when healthy. We don't know what he's going to look like in this system. And they kind of pulled a poor man's version of what they did with Joe Mixon last year in that he was going to get released. They didn't even want to risk him hitting the market. So they decided to bring in Christian Kirk and make him a part of their squad. Now, is he going to have a mix and impact? I would bet against it. Could he be a solid number 2 receiver? Perhaps. But he's better than what they got. And based on what the market was and what the market is at the wide receiver position, not just in free agency, but in the draft, I think this was one of the most important moves they made. And it's no surprise that Christian Kirk advances over the wide receiver depth. Although, while the wide receiver depth might not be as impactful, I think it did maybe not solve an issue, but at least gave a strong possibility to improving the bottom of the wide receiver room. So I think they've done an average job, especially given the resources of improving the wide receiver room. And I think the Christian Kirk move could be the one with the highest upside. You could even say that people are maybe sleeping on Christian Kirk. So Christian Kirk advances to the next round. Now, then we go down to the offensive line. Cam Robinson, he's had a rough time the last couple of years. Very ridiculed. Jacksonville doesn't have a lot of good things to say about him, and Minnesota doesn't really have a lot of good things to say about him either. Do you have your left tackle of the future? I would say the answer to that is a very emphatic no. You do not have your left tackle of the future, but do you have a guy that can maybe hold it down that's better than what you had before? I would say the answer to that is yes. And you're not relying on Titus Howard, and it's not a big commitment. And you also traded Laramie Tunsil, which we'll get to in a second. So Cam Robinson signing, pretty impactful. The Rankins signing, Sheldon Rankins, I mean, I happen to think that the Texans can find guys like Sheldon Rankins. I feel like that's one of their strengths that we'll talk about in a sec. So you got to advance Robinson here. So Robinson, the Cam Robinson signing versus the Christian Kirk trade, that's going to be one Final Four matchup. And I think it's intriguing. I think you'll find people on both ends. I did find this nugget from one of the better Texans aggregators, Sideline Sarah, that I thought was interesting from Vikings Reddit on Cam Robinson. And I'm just going to read this to you because I found it a little bit interesting. And you can tell this is someone who's pretty heavily invested. And this is a good find. The number of pressures by Cam Robinson, they say, is heavily inflated from Sam Darnold's deficiencies. Says they gave Darnold the second most time in the pocket all of last season, yet he still gave up 1 million pressures. That tells you who is to blame and not our offensive line. Darnold's slow processor to accompany an offensive system that has lots of intermediate passing to massive amounts of pressure. Our line was near the top of the league in pass block win rate, and the time to throw Darnold had shows that. Cam Robinson was quite good. This is what he's saying. People have to wake up on this. Our offensive line did a great job in pass blocking this past year. They were downright pathetically awful in run blocking, though, and that's why we needed to upgrade our interior, not because of pass blocking issues. So that's just one perspective on the Cam Robinson thing that I think is maybe something to note. Matchup number 3, the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade. You can call it the Kenyon Green trade if you'd like, but the Texans, Kenyon Green was not going to be a big part of the future. You thought maybe they would get like a throwaway, which they traded for a little bit later on, the Kenyon Green version from the Vikings with Ingram. But the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade gives them one of the better young secondaries in the league. Now, he's matched up against the ridiculed guards, the Ingram and the Tomlinson, bringing those guys in, two guys who not very well spoken of with their previous stops, but perhaps better than Kenyon Green and Shaq Mason, which might not be saying much. This is a no-brainer. CJ Gardner-Johnson advances, and he's one win away from a potential showdown with Christian Kirk. Matchup number 4, the Tunsil trade versus the defensive line depth pieces. Look, I'm fine with the Tunsil trade. We've spoken on the Laramie Tunsil situation, myself and Cody Stutes, and this decision eventually having to happen. We've been talking about this for months. But I'm not going to sit here and say it's a good trade. It's way too early to say that. And Cam Robinson filling in for Laramie Tunsil, not a dub. We haven't even seen what they're going to do with the draft equity. We haven't seen what Tunsil's going to do. So it would be too early to say that. The D-line pieces, I think this is one of D'Amico Ryan's superpowers, which is why I'm hesitant to say that the Sheldon Rankins move was awesome, because I think D'Amico Ryan's just finds D linemen and he's able to get the most of them. And you already have the 2 best edge guys in the league. You add depth behind them with Darrell Taylor. You bring back Barnett. I think this could end up being the strength of this team. And that's why the D-line pieces advance. Now, a lot of it has to do with who they're playing against, but are playing behind. But if you have one of the deepest D-lines in the league, and you have a coach that knows how to coach them up, then it's a good thing to have. So we got to advance the D-line depth pieces over Laramie Tunsil. Now we go to matchup number 5, Final Four matchup number 1, Christian Kirk trade versus the Robinson signing. Now, receiver, offensive line, your 2 biggest needs. Cam Robinson, nothing to write home about. Christian Kirk, the last couple of years, nothing to write home about. I would still go with the Christian Kirk trade. I think there's decent upside here. I think you stay out of the wide receiver market. You're not as desperate. Cam Robinson, not the worst signing, but for my money, I'm going with the Christian Kirk signing because I actually thought that wide receiver was a bigger need than offensive line. You can say there's kind of some similarities to these moves, but the Christian Kirk trade advances to the finals. And spoiler alert, it will face CJ Gardner-Johnson in the trade that was made by Caserio. The DL depth pieces, they're nice, but it's not the best secondary in the league. It's not where we're going with that. So championship matchup, the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade versus the Christian Kirk trade. This is crazy. So you have a guy who's battle tested, brings another element to this secondary. You put him with Stingley, Bullock, Lassiter. You can make a case. This is already a top 5 secondary. You can also safely bet that it's a top 3 secondary once the season starts. That's impressive, and that might end up being the strength of this team. The Christian Kirk thing, there's nothing certain that's going to happen with Christian Kirk. Is he better than what you had? Yes. Is he going to stay healthy? Who knows? I know what CJ Gardner-Johnson's going to bring, and I know what CJ Gardner-Johnson has in front of him and around him and how he's coached. We don't know what Nick Caley is as an offensive coordinator. We don't know what Nick Caley is going to be. We don't know what that's going to look like. So there's too many variables for me right now to say that the Kirk trade is better than taking one of the better defenses in the league and making it even better. I think there's a chance that they say defense wins championships. I wouldn't bet on the Texans to win any championships, but this defense is looking like a championship defense. You can make a case it did last year. We don't know what Nick Caley is. Nick Caley could be the best offensive coordinator that we've seen. He could be one of the next bright head coaches, young head coaches in the league, but we have no idea. We know what D'Amico's defense is going to do. We know how much talent is in that secondary. We know how much talent is in front of CJ Gardner-Johnson. So he's going to be able to do what he's got to do with the best edge duo in the league, arguably, and Will Anderson and Daniil Hunter in front of him, and D'Amico coaching the defense. So CJ Gardner-Johnson right now, that's the best move they made. And when you factor in that they got him for Kenyon Green, who they didn't even want, it's kind of a no-brainer. What do you think? What was the best move that Nick Caserio made? Did I miss anything? Did I screw anything up? Let me know. Let's embrace March Madness, embrace debate, embrace Cody Stutes doing his thing out there in Louisiana. I'm about to be in San Antonio. Fun times, but the videos don't stop. The content doesn't stop. Shout out to everyone. I hope you have a really good weekend. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like. Be sure to ride along. Be sure to always remember when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. And as Cody Stutes would say, eat good, sleep good, be good. We'll talk Texans again soon. Everyone have a great weekend. Let me know what I screwed up.